Welcome to our channel. We share thrilling stories, biographies of amazing people, and the most important, unforgettable events in human history. Today, we're diving into the absolute biggest, World War I. We'll explore how it started, what led to it, and how it shaped the world we live in now. This is a powerful, detailed journey through history. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment on what you think about World War I. Chapter 1. The Spark That Set the World on Fire. The year is 1914. Europe wasn't just unstable, it was a powder keg waiting for a match. For years, nations had been locked in a tense competition, growing armies, forming secret alliances, and watching each other with deadly suspicion. The air was thick with tension. A single spark could ignite an explosion. The Sarajevo assassination, a fatal wrong turn. It's June 28, 1914. The morning sun warms the city of Sarajevo, Bosnia. The streets are decked out for a celebration, the arrival of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his wife, Sophie. Hidden in the cheering crowd were assassins, young and determined. One was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old nationalist belonging to the Black Hand. The Archduke's open-top car was struck by a bomb which he deflected. He survived the first attack, but instead of leaving the city, he insisted on visiting the injured officers in the hospital. This pride proved fatal. His driver, nervous and shaken, took a wrong turn. At that exact moment, Gavrilo Princip was outside a cafe. He saw the Archduke's car stop right in front of him. Princip pulled out his pistol. 2 shots. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were killed. The mechanism of madness, alliances and mobilization. The news shocked Europe, but the escalation wasn't immediate. It took a month of diplomatic blunders and rigid agreements. Austria-Hungary received a blank check, unconditional support from Germany. This emboldened them to issue an ultimatum to Serbia that was impossible to meet. July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia, bound by a commitment to protect Slavic peoples, begins full mobilization to defend Serbia. Germany demands Russia halt mobilization. When Russia refuses, Germany declares war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, mobilizes. Germany declares war on France. To defeat France quickly, Germany enacted the Schlieffen Plan, invade neutral Belgium to bypass French defenses. This violation of neutrality was the tipping point for Great Britain, which declared war on Germany on August 4, 1914. Within a single week, the entire continent of Europe was at war. Men rushed to enlist, dreaming of a short, glorious battle. It will be over by Christmas, they boasted. They had no idea of the industrial horror that awaited them. Chapter 2. The World on Fire, from Mobile Warfare to the Deadlock. The Western Front, the race to the sea. The initial German advance was stunningly fast, but the plan failed at the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914, when French and British forces stopped the German drive toward Paris. Following this, both sides attempted to outflank each other, rushing north toward the coast in what became known as the Race to the Sea. When they reached the English Channel, the line of battle solidified. This moment defined the next 4 years. Both sides began to dig in to defend against the devastating power of modern machine guns and artillery. Shutterstock. The Western Front, stretching over 400 miles from the North Sea to Switzerland, became a complex, permanent maze of trenches. The horror of the trenches' skull. Trench warfare was a grinding, slow battle of attrition. Soldiers lived for months in deep, muddy, rat-infested scars in the earth. The conditions were horrific. Sanitation, non-existent. Disease, typhus, cholera, trench foot was a constant killer. The smell, a horrific mix of stale sweat, unburied bodies, disease, and cordite gunpowder. No man's land. The deadly, often narrow, strip of ground between enemy trenches, covered in barbed wire and craters, which was impossible to cross alive. The attack, a going-over-the-top attack, often meant charging into machine gun fire, resulting in thousands of casualties for the gain of a few yards. The Forgotten Front, the East. While the Western Front was defined by the deadlock of the trenches, the Eastern Front was a different beast, vast, expansive, and highly mobile. The Russians faced two powerful armies, Germany in the north and Austria-Hungary in the south. German success. At the battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes in 1914, the Germans, led by generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, utterly crushed the invading Russian armies, capturing over 200,000 men. Russian weakness. Though Russia had a massive army, it was desperately underequipped and poorly led. Soldiers lacked rifles, food, and warm clothing. This suffering and the military defeats at the front would eventually lead to mass discontent and the Russian Revolution in 1917, pulling Russia out of the war. Chapter 3. New Dimensions of Warfare. Bomb. New weapons of destruction. The war became an industrial-scale slaughter, driven by technological innovation. Machine guns, the most lethal defensive weapon of the war, capable of firing for 600 rounds per minute, making infantry charges suicidal. Poison gas, first used by the Germans in 1915, chlorine, then mustard gas. Shutterstock. Explore. The use of gas introduced a new, terrifying psychological element, forcing all soldiers to carry gas masks. 3. Artillery. Responsible for the majority of casualties, massive shells could obliterate trenches and cause widespread shell shock, PTSD. 4. Tanks. Introduced by the British in 1916, Battle of the Somme. They were initially slow and unreliable, but they were the first vehicle capable of breaking the trench deadlock. Battles of attrition, Verdun and the Somme. The Germans attempted to bleed France white at the Battle of Verdun, 1916. The French refused to yield. The battle raged for 10 months, resulting in an estimated 700,000 casualties for virtually no change in the front line. To relieve pressure on Verdun, the British launched the Battle of the Somme, 1916. On the very first day, the British suffered 57,470 casualties, the single worst day in the history of the British Army. The entire battle lasted 5 months, cost over 1 million casualties total, and gained the Allies about 6 miles of territory. The Naval and Submarine War. The war wasn't just fought on land. Britain's powerful Royal Navy immediately enacted a naval blockade of Germany, crippling their economy and food supply. Germany countered with U-boats, submarines. Shutterstock. This was the era of unrestricted submarine warfare, where German U-boats would sink any vessel, military or civilian, approaching Allied ports. The sinking of the British passenger liner RMS Lusitania in 1915, which killed 128 Americans, was a major factor that pushed the U.S. closer to war. The war spreads. Gallipoli. In 1915, Britain and France attempted to knock the Ottoman Empire, which had joined the Central Powers, out of the war by seizing control of the Dardanelles Strait. The resulting Gallipoli campaign was an absolute disaster. Allied forces, primarily Australian and New Zealand Army Corps ANZAC, landed on the beaches but were immediately pinned down by fierce Ottoman resistance. After 8 months of fighting in terrible conditions, the Allies evacuated, having lost over 250,000 men with no strategic gain. Chapter 4. The Turning Tide and the Final Reckoning. Water Wave. Russia's exit and America's entry. By 1917, the war reached a turning point. Russia's collapse, the immense suffering and military defeats led to the Bolshevik Revolution. Vladimir Lenin and the Communists seized power and immediately signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in early 1918, officially pulling Russia out of the war. This freed up nearly 1 million German troops for the Western Front. America's entrance, Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, and the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram, a German proposal for a military alliance with Mexico, convinced President Woodrow Wilson to declare war in April 1917. The arrival of fresh American doughboys, soldiers, and enormous industrial resources provided the Allies with the manpower and morale they desperately needed. The German last offensive. With Russia out, Germany launched the massive Spring Offensive 1918, a final, all-or-nothing push to win the war before the Americans arrived in force. They made huge territorial gains, pushing to within 40 miles of Paris. However, the German supply lines stretched thin and their troops were exhausted. The Allied lines held. The Allied counteroffensive. With the Germans exhausted, the Allies, strengthened by the new American troops, launched the 100 Days Offensive in August 1918. This was a continuous string of victories that shattered the German army's morale. Generals like Ferdinand Foch, French commander, used tanks and coordinated attacks to finally break the trench deadlock. The collapse was swift. October 1918, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires surrender. November 9, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II is forced to abdicate, step down, and Germany is declared a republic. November 11, 1918, at 11:00 a.m., the armistice is signed in a railway carriage in France. The guns fell silent. The aftermath, a changed world. The war left a scar on the globe. 20 million people dead. The scale of loss was unprecedented. Empires vanished. The Austro-Hungarian, Russian, German, and Ottoman empires all disappeared. The Treaty of Versailles. Signed in 1919, the treaty punished Germany harshly, forcing them to accept the war guilt clause, pay enormous reparations, $33 billion, and severely restrict their military. This humiliation and economic hardship bred resentment that extremists like the Nazis would later exploit. The League of Nations, established as Wilson's dream of an international body to prevent future wars, but it lacked power and membership. The U.S. never joined. The men who returned carried the burden of the lost generation. Their innocence, their faith in progress, and their lives were shattered. World War I did not end conflict. It merely paused it, setting the deep historical, political, and emotional foundations for the next, even deadlier war 2 decades later.